Afghanistan is in the front line of the Western country's efforts to combat extremism. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been pumped into the country since 9/11. Here is the most testing lab for the proposition that development can secure the peace. We're building an infrastructure, laying the psychological and physical groundwork of a civil society, bring peace to a country that has no living memory of what that concept means. In the few places where NATO troops have established a measure of security, reconstruction is possible. Western aid is paying for new roads and sewage systems. Electric supply in Kabul is limited to 6 hours a day. In 2002, the Northwest Power Plant provided electricity for the first time in over a decade. Keiko Jan is an electrical engineer. Without the Keiko Jams, the country will go back into medieval times.
During the communist regime and the Mujahideen regime, they were fighting in our country. As a result of this fighting, we didn't know how to live. We didn't know the meaning of life. When the new government came into existence, this whole area of Afghanistan, the peace and tranquility returned back. Everyone was going to their jobs, going to their work, and right now there is no fighting, so there is no problem. Thanks to Almighty God, everyone can do some kind of work.
As a result of the civil war, around the world there are more than 2 million refugees and internally displaced Afghans.
Millions of refugees fled Afghanistan during the conflict since the 1980s. I'm glad to see that they are returning to Afghanistan in large numbers, providing housing for them and building cities and towns is taking place. In the case of Japan, we put particular emphasis on the so-called DDR, disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration in societies of ex-combatants. This is very difficult, but I'm glad that some concrete successful results are being achieved.
They are called returnees. Until people like these can get a decent living and the word gets out, there will be little incentive to return. 3.5 million Afghans became refugees. 2 million stayed in neighbouring Iran and Pakistan. 1.5 million have returned since the overthrow of the Taliban. 1 million are internally displaced. And scenes like this do not help. The country is infested with landmines, turning the able-bodied into beggars. Not only is there political turmoil, but there is also an escalating drug problem.
Some mother during the pregnancy, they using the opium, some the tranquilizer. The mother working for the carpet weaving, they try to making the more carpet using the opium. The mother takes the small amount of the opium for the children. The small children, maybe they're growing, this is also addict.
But at least there is now some attempt at rehabilitation.
The opium products constitute about 35 to 40% of our economy. It's illegal. The people of Afghanistan wants to get rid of them. The government wants to get rid of them. We don't want the international community to suffer from this. We don't want our own people to suffer from this. The size of this sector is estimated by the IMF to be around $2.8 billion. This is the consequences of failed states such as Afghanistan that 9/11 occurred. I mean, what's a failed state means? A failed state is a state that it's, first of all, it's not a state. It's out of the international system. And it does not abide by international concerns, it does not abide by international norms, well, then it might as well allow poppies to grow here and terrorism to operate here. Anybody who can offer monetary rewards, they'll go along with that. Rebuilding the Afghan state is first and foremost in the best interest of the Afghan people, but it also has very positive consequences for the international community, for international security.
Conflict and poverty are mutually interacting, and causation runs in each direction. Conflict causes poverty, poverty causes conflict, and one can get stuck in a vicious circle or in a trap of a poverty-conflict trap. So in each of these settings, I think it's wrong to think of poverty as the only cause of conflict or conflict as the only cause of poverty, but they're each definitely affecting the other.
Había mucha guerrilla.
A lot of guerrillas. They wanted us to run drugs, arms and such like.
Lados, armas y todo eso. Porque la gente no se solidariza de los demás.
When you die, it isn't you who feels the pain. It's those left behind. All it causes is damage.
Solo hacen hacer daño.
The lush jungle of Colombia, the contrast with the man-made desert that is Afghanistan, could not be greater. And yet there are disturbing similarities. Narcotics and the insatiable demand of the rich world for stimulants. Opium is Afghanistan's biggest cash crop. Cocaine is Colombia's. It's an ugly fact of life that when the countries that control 80% of the world economy decide they want a resource, mayhem can result in countries that can supply its addiction. In Angola it was diamonds, in West Papua it's timber. In the countries of the Caspian, it's caviar. Colombia shares something else with Afghanistan. Everyone under 60 grew up with civil war. 2 generations of Colombians have grown up accepting civil conflict as the status quo. Civil society and so-called good governance are something foreigners talk about. This is Uncle Sam's backyard, and he has a very big nose for the white powder.
For me, there shouldn't be war in this country, because it causes a lot of damage to families. When they kill people, it is very damaging.
Porque la gente no se solidariza de los demás.
When you die, it isn't you who feels the pain. It's those left behind. All it causes is damage.
Solo hacen hacer daño.
You have a commodity, something that you produce, very often something that you extract from the ground. It can be oil, it can be a mineral, for example. And the difference between what it costs you to extract it and the price that you get is enormous. Normally, any commodity that you bring out, you have your cost and then you have a margin for profits. But when this difference is so enormous, then we call it rent. When that difference is very enormous, it's worth fighting over. Because when you appropriate it, you get a tremendous amount of resources.